Revealed. Incredible transformation as billionaire discovers hidden humanity behind Maid's tears. In the buzzing heart of California's tech empire, where million-dollar views met the mundane grind of suburban life, billionaire Scott Harrison lived in a penthouse that screamed luxury. He had the cars, the parties, and a wall full of accolades. But despite this sparkle, a hollowness echoed within him. He was extraordinary in the eyes of the world, yet each day felt like a scripted performance, a mesmerizing illusion that faded as soon as the lights dimmed. Maria, a 30-year-old single mother, stepped into his life like a soft breeze on a sweltering day. Each morning, she arrived with tired eyes that told stories of sleepless nights, her children's needs, and her ailing mother's care weighing heavily on her shoulders. Their encounters were brief. She cleaned the penthouse while he pretended to work, surrounded by high-tech gadgets and Garamond fonts on glossy presentations. Yet, it was Maria's quiet strength that started to chip away at Scott's fortified heart. One evening, as he feigned productivity, he caught her wiping tears while folding laundry. A wave of discomfort washed over him. He'd been so lost in his bubble of privilege that he had overlooked the very real struggles around him. Maria was caring for a local veteran's family, all while trying to survive in a world where each penny counted. This revelation struck Scott like a lightning bolt. How could he have been so blind? His heart raced, and suddenly the opulence of his reality felt like a gilded cage. Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. He summoned courage and invited Maria to join a community program he sponsored, confident that this would bridge the chasm between their worlds. However, when the event deteriorated into chaos, misunderstandings stripped Maria of her dignity, leaving her voiceless in front of a crowd that saw only her humble position, not her worth. "Why can't you see me?" Maria's voice wavered, piercing the air like a raw wound. "I'm not just a maid. I have a life, a story. I'm not invisible." Her words fell like heavy stones on Scott's shoulders. The truth was undeniable. The shiny veneer of his world had obscured the gritty realities faced by those like Maria. Now, confronted with the sorrowful impact of his thoughtless charity, Scott felt the sharp edges of his reality dig deeper. Torn between the comforts of his status and the aching humanity represented by Maria's tears, he found himself lingering at a community center one afternoon. He watched families seeking help and children with dreams shining brightly, striving for a better tomorrow despite their struggles. Every moment revealed the sacrifices that had been woven into their lives. A tapping on his shoulder jolted him back to the now. A familiar face appeared, the veteran from the news, the weight of unspoken stories in his eyes. Just as Scott was ready to extend a hand, he uncovered a stunning truth about Maria's sacrifices. Everything he believed about success, justice, and compassion was now teetering on the edge. Could he truly redefine himself? Would he step off the pedestal he had built and face the storm below? Would he choose the warmth of genuine connection or cling to the empty allure of power? As the community rallied around Maria, the stage was set for Scott's moment of reckoning. The tears of a maid had ignited a flame, forcing him to confront who he really was and who he could potentially become. Scott's heart raced, the veteran's gaze piercing through the layers of his carefully constructed world. The man's presence was a stark reminder that the stories of struggle were not just distant echoes. They were here, pressing against him like a hidden weight. He felt the urge to give, to change, to genuinely connect with those who had long been on the fringes of his awareness. "Hi, Mr. Harrison," the veteran said, his voice gravelly but respectful. I wanted to thank you for what you did for my family. That program you sponsored, it really helped us. But, he hesitated, weighing his words. We still need more support. It's tough out there. Scott swallowed hard. Here was a man who had fought for his country, yet his family struggled to make ends meet. The juxtaposition staggered him. Wealth and resources were within Scott's reach, yet it had never occurred to him that he could use them to drive real change. Could he? Was he up to the task that came with such privilege? I want to do more, he stammered, the edges of his confidence fraying. What does your family really need? The veteran's face softened. We could use more outreach, find jobs for veterans who are struggling, not just for our families, but for everyone. There's a lot of talent, but there's a barrier. You have the connections. You could help break that down. Scott nodded slowly, the wheels in his mind desperately turning. This wasn't just about Maria anymore. It was bigger. It enveloped everyone who faced hardships that he remained blissfully unaware of for too long. He could see it, a network of support that wasn't just a one-time charity, it could be a life-changing effort. But with that vision came doubt. What if I fail? What if all I do is make it worse? His mind spun with what-ifs as he considered stepping back into the spotlight, no longer as a billionaire behind the curtain, but as a leader standing with those who needed his voice. Before he could spiral deeper into uncertainty, he spotted Maria across the center. Her head was bent low as she distributed food to families. Even from afar, he could see that familiar strength, and his heart twisted painfully. She was the embodiment of resilience and unwavering figure despite her struggles. He approached her with hesitation. Maria, he called softly, not wanting to startle her. When she looked up, her expression was a mix of surprise and wariness. Scott, she replied, her voice cautious. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you. I want to help. I mean really help. He could feel the weight of his words. It was a leap, a surrender to vulnerability. Her brow furrowed, uncertainty clouding her eyes. Help? After how everything went down at the event? I know I messed up, he admitted, his voice strained. I assumed I wasn't listening, but I want to change that. I want to understand and actually make an impact, not just as a billionaire but as a part of this community. Maria's lips parted slightly, and in that moment, he could see a flicker of hope reflected in her expression. Perhaps it was too late for him to change, for them both to redefine their paths. Then let us start by listening, she replied, her voice steadier. It begins with understanding what each person truly needs. As they stood in the bustling center surrounded by the vibrant tapestry of lives intertwined, Scott felt the first stirrings of determination. But as discussions began, a commotion erupted nearby. A familiar face in distress caught Scott's eye, and it filled him with dread. What had he stepped into now? Was change really possible, or was he simply stepping deeper into chaos? The flicker of doubt started to stir again, threatening to dim the newfound light of hope. Scott's stomach knotted. The noise was rising, angry shouts, a voice pleading. He shifted his gaze back to Maria, who wore an expression that balanced concern and determination. Stay here, she ordered, her voice firm as she stepped away to assess the situation. Heart pounding, Scott watched her weave through the crowd, her strength radiating confidence. He felt small in comparison, anxious and unsure. What if Maria needed him? Then he saw the familiar face, a woman he had met once before during a fundraiser. She was clutching her son tightly to her side, her eyes wide with desperation. I don't know what to do, she cried, her voice breaking. The landlord says we have to leave. We can't find anywhere we can afford. His heart sank as he approached the now tightly packed swamp of bodies. Had he really thought he could just step into this world and fix things? Doubt surged again, heavy as lead. Scott pressed forward, ignoring the trembling in his hands. "Excuse me, can I help?" he called out. The crowd seemed to shift, allowing him an inch of space. The woman turned, surprise flickering in her emotional gaze. "Mr. Harrison," she gasped, confusion mingled with hope. You're here?" "I want to help," he said, the weight of his own privilege landing hard on his shoulders. "What can I do?" Tears coursed down her cheeks. "I need to keep my son safe. We have nowhere to go. I just need a little time." Scott's mind raced. His resources loomed before him like a gatekeeper to opportunity. For too long, he had been the one looking outward, not realizing the urgent call for help that beckoned closer. "I can help with that," he assured her, tentative yet resolute, grasping desperately for solutions. "I can talk to my contacts. I can find something more stable, somewhere for you both." Maria returned, a blend of relief and professionalism washing over her face. "Scott, let us make a plan. We can find resources, shelters, anything that might help." But the veteran's words echoed in Scott's ears. It wasn't just about one family. "No, we need to think bigger," he said, the determination swelling within him. "If we can't secure something for everyone, then what is the point? We need a network. Escort services, job training, we can create opportunities. This can't just be a temporary fix." Maria's eyes locked onto his, seeing the realization bloom there. "You're right," she breathed, her voice a soft affirmation, igniting the fire of purpose within them. "If we could just gather the resources, if we could unite the community." In that moment, Scott felt a crack appear in the barriers he had put up around his own privilege. Something inside some dormant part of him began to awaken. He wasn't sure of everything yet, but a spark of genuine connection burned brightly in this sea of suffering. Around him, the atmosphere shifted. Others began to join in, offering suggestions, sharing stories, lighting small torches of hope in their own distress. But then, through the energy and urgency, a shriek sliced the air, pulling them back to chaos. A teenager was on the ground, grasping his leg, anguish written across his face. "It's broken. It hurts," he cried. Scott's heart plunged again. Was he standing on the edge of hope only to be drawn back into despair? Could they truly make a difference if all they faced was a string of crises? As the crowd rushed, their conversations melding into a singular call for action, Scott felt a deeper resolve settle into his bones. But would that be enough? Could one man rally a community, or was he still destined to only skim the surface of change? "Let us move." Maria's voice rang above the noise, but Scott knew the real battle was just beginning. How deep would he have to dive to discover the change that rippled below the surface? With determination swelling in his chest, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever awaited. Could he really change the narrative? The question lingered, a weight to bear. Scott's breath caught in his throat as he pushed through the throngs of people who were suddenly buzzing with energy. There was a sharp, painful tension in the air that made every heartbeat feel louder. He glanced at the teenager writhing on the ground, the crowd parting somewhat to allow access to him. The boy's face was pale, eyes glistening with tears as he gripped his leg. "Stay calm," Maria shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. She was kneeling beside the boy in an instant, examining the injury with a steady hand. Scott forced himself to shake off the paralysis of fear and moved closer, still feeling the weight of the woman's desperate gaze behind him. The boy whimpered again, and Scott knelt next to Maria. "We need to get him to a hospital," he said, the urgency in his voice surprising even himself. "Call an ambulance. Someone," Maria yelled, her focus solely on the boy. Yet, the crowd continued to swell, people still bickering, clamoring for help. It was a crisis on many fronts, and Scott's previous determination felt small and fading in the chaos. He pulled out his phone, fumbling, hand shaking. How had it gotten to this point? Just last month, he was attending galas, mingling with the elite. Yet here in the midst of pain, fear, and uncertainty, he felt more alive, more connected than he ever had among the polished marble floors of luxury. "Mom, please!" The boy's plea struck Scott like a lightning bolt. He wanted to reach out, to tell the teenager that he would be okay, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he stayed silent, watching Maria work. The fierce determination in her eyes ignited something in him, an urge to be more than just a silent observer. Amidst the noise, Scott raised his voice. "Everyone! If you can help, help!" He could feel the collective breath of the crowd waver, their focus shifting as they turned to him, maybe seeing a glimmer of hope, maybe seeing a man willing to stand up. "If anyone has a car or can drive, please. We need to get him out of here." A few people stepped forward, but it was far from a solution. Maria's hands brushed gently over the boy's injury, a stark contrast to his cries of pain. "You're going to be all right," she whispered. Scott felt a tightening in his chest. He wanted to shield her from the heartache surrounding them, but he knew those feelings were all part of this fight. Suddenly, someone emerged from the crowd. It was the woman Scott had spoken to earlier. She stepped up, tears still shining in her eyes, but she looked different now, ready to act. "My brother. He has a van nearby. He can help." "That's it," Scott encouraged, synergy buzzing around them. "Let us go. Maria, can you stabilize him? We can carry him, have him propped up in the back." They worked as a team, urgency fueling actions, strangers becoming allies in a shared purpose. Even as Scott grappled with his own doubts, the boy's pain, and the mother's worry ignited a solidarity like he had never experienced. As they carefully lifted the teenager, Scott caught a glimpse of the faces behind him, worried yet determined. It was becoming clearer. This was not just a single moment of suffering, a whole network of dismantled lives stretched out in every direction. But as they moved forward, every step sent a quiet question spinning in Scott's mind. Could he be that anchor to hold them together? Could he really make a difference with all he had profited from a world so far removed from this one? The van pulled up, someone jumping out to help them. But just as hope surged, a shout broke through. "Wait!" A voice from the crowd called out, and Scott froze. Who was it? What now? Churning inside with conflicting emotions, he turned to face what was to come next. Would he be able to handle a deeper truth? Would the price of action awaken something he couldn't control? Scott turned slowly, apprehension heavy in the air. The cry had come from a tall man at the edge of the crowd, his expression frantic, eyes darting as if searching for something or someone. There was a tension in the man's posture that instantly set Scott on edge. "Wait!" The man shouted again, panic lacing his voice. "You don't know what you're doing." Maria, still crouched beside the injured boy, raised her head, eyebrows knitting together. "What do you mean?" "We're trying to help him." The man stepped closer. He was out of breath, as if he had just sprinted through the chaos. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, but he's not who you think he is." "What do you mean?" Scott found himself asking, even as he felt a wave of confusion wash over him. The crowd shifted, curiosity drawing them closer, holding their collective breath. The boy on the ground groaned softly, but the man continued, urgency flickering in his gaze. "He's mixed up in something dangerous. If you take him away, you might put him in more jeopardy." Scott's heart raced, his thoughts seizing up. "What are you talking about? Just help us get him to a hospital." The man shook his head, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. "You don't understand. They were waiting for him. They won't stop looking. You'll only invite trouble." Scott caught Maria's gaze, uncertainty framing her features. He could see the collective anxiety of the crowd heightening. Whispers and murmurs ebbed and flowed around them, fueling his own rising apprehension. The synergy they had felt moments before now seemed frail. "Wait," Scott said slowly, stepping closer to the man. "What do you know about him?" The man hesitated, and then took a deep breath, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. "He is involved with a gang. This isn't just an accident. They're going to come here looking for him, any moment now." Scott's thoughts raced. They were faced with an unimaginable decision. Help the boy and risk drawing danger to them all, or leave him to whatever trouble he had gotten into. His hands clenched into fists. He felt trapped between his conscience and a new, raw anxiety. "So we just leave him?" Maria's voice broke through, trembling slightly, the fire of her determination fighting against her fear. "Maybe we should call the police instead," someone chimed in from the back. "Let them handle it." Frustration surged within Scott. How did it come to this? Just moments ago, they felt powerful, like an army of strangers uniting for a cause. Now they were paralyzed by indecision, fear eroding their courage. The boy whimpered again, and Scott looked back at him, pain etched all over his pale face. "We can't just abandon him. He needs help. He is hurt." The man's eyes widened. "And that is exactly what they want. This is a trap." A creeping dread settled around Scott's heart. He could feel the pulse of everyone around him. Their breath mingled in confusion and terror. They had stepped outside their comfort zones, into the fire of a stranger as suffering, only to be confronted with questions they never anticipated. "Please," the boy murmured. His hand fell limp against the pavement. And in that moment, something shifted deep within Scott. It was a clarity, a sense of accountability. An understanding that one decision could ripple through lives beyond their own. The stakes were crystal clear now. "We have to make a choice," Scott said, voice steady despite the roiling emotions inside. "Help him or walk away. If we leave, we'll regret it. But if we help him, we could be putting everyone at risk," Maria replied, her voice trembling. "I know," he said, feeling the weight of her concern pressing down on him. "But doing nothing will haunt us. We can't just ignore his pain." A silence enveloped the group, the tension thick enough to choke on. And just as he thought they had reached a breaking point, a distant sound tinged the air, a siren wailing in the distance, growing louder with each moment. "It's too late," the man gasped. Scott felt something welling inside him, a flicker of hope tangled with fear. "Then we need to decide fast. Or chances are we'll have to face more than just his injuries. What do we do?" And with that urgent question hanging in the air, Scott understood. A choice had to be made, and it would define not just this moment, but all the moments to come. The siren's wail faded into the backdrop of gasping breaths and whispered fears among the crowd. Time seemed to slow, every heartbeat pulsing like thunder in Scott's ears. The moments stretched. The weight of decisions hung thick in the air. "Scott, what do we do?" Maria's voice trembled, her eyes pleading for guidance. They were looking to him for an answer, for a sign that would cut through the paralysis that gripped them all. "Help him," Scott said, resolve solidifying in his chest. "We owe him that much. He is scared and alone." "But if we help him," Maria hesitated, glancing around at the onlookers, uncertainty etched into her features. "What if they come after all of us?" Scott took a calming breath, trying to shake off the doubt that flickered at the edges of his mind. He stepped closer to the boy, feeling the heat of the pavement seep into his shoes. "I don't know what is going to happen, but we can't leave him here. Not like this." From the corner of his eye, he saw the tall man nod. "You're making a mistake," he said softly, urgency threading through his words. "But you have a chance. If he has revived, you need to move fast." A flicker of determination sparked among the crowd. Someone stepped forward, then another. They were all feeling it now, the instinct to come together, to act, to fight against the uncertainty. Scott felt the pulse of purpose flow through them, washing away their fear, if just temporarily. "Let us get him ready," Scott said, already kneeling beside the boy again. "We're taking him to a hospital." As he reached for the boy's hand, he felt the warmth of life still there, even if it was faint. "Stay with us, buddy," he whispered, squeezing gently. "Help is coming." The surrounding people participated. Someone tore a piece of fabric to use as a makeshift bandage. Another gathered items for makeshift support. They moved quickly, each small action stitched them tighter as a group. The sirens in the distance grew louder, and with them, a renewed urgency to act. Yet, through the whirlwind of activity, Scott couldn't shake the man's warning. Who were they really saving? This boy, who lay vulnerable on the asphalt, was entangled in something far larger, something that threatened to disrupt their lives. "Hold his head," Maria instructed, her voice growing steadier, slipping into a rhythm of purpose. Scott nodded, using one hand to support the boy's head while carefully monitoring his breathing with the other. Each rise and fall of his chest felt like a countdown. Time was running out, and with it, the meaning of the risk they were taking. "Here!" a voice called, and Scott turned to see a woman pushing through the crowd, a blanket in hand. "Cover him." With shaking hands, they wrapped the boy in warmth, igniting a sense of protection. Scott's heart swelled, hope flickering in rhythm with the dim light of hope in the boy's eyes. But just as they were about to lift him, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind them. The crowd visibly tensed. Scott spun around to see shadowed figures emerging from the chaos, faces familiar yet shrouded in menace. "They've found him," the tall man breathed, eyes wide. An icy grip clutched at Scott's heart. The choice they made had drawn them into something deeper, something dangerous. The boy's moans wrapped around them like winter's chill, and they had just stepped into the eye of a storm. "Run!" someone shouted, and the urgency in their voice set adrenaline coursing through Scott's veins. But where would they run to? Scott's mind raced with possibilities and outcomes, each darker than the last. "Go!" Maria yelled again, her voice cutting through the noise, a beacon of strength. And then, like a wave surging through the crowd, they moved not as individuals gripped by fear, but as a single entity united by a common goal, to protect. As they started to retreat, the figures in the shadows surged forward, their presence a dark echo of the chaos surrounding them. Scott's heart pounded as he realized they were now part of a much larger battle. What lay ahead? Would they escape with the boy? Or had they just awakened forces they couldn't control? Without knowing, they were about to plunge into the depths of a world that could shatter everything they believed. The sirens screamed louder, urgency radiating, and once again, Scott felt the weight of choices pressing down the very decisions that would alter the course of their lives forever. With the shadows closing in, one singular question burned in his mind. Could they protect the boy, and themselves, from the danger that had lurked so closely? Scott barely had a moment to process the danger before Maria's strong grip on his arm pulled him into motion. They dashed through the chaos, their hearts thumping in sync with the pounding footsteps behind them. Unity surged in this crisis. They were a team, and there was strength in numbers. "Over here!" another voice called, pointing toward an alley that snaked between two buildings. It was dark, but it was a chance, a flicker of hope amid a storm of uncertainty. The crowd churned into the alley, every face lined with fear and resolve. Scott kept his focus on the boy, who was still cradled in their makeshift blanket. He felt that spark of life tethering them together, a fragile thread they had no intention of severing. The deeper they moved into the alley, the more the world felt like it was peeling away, the frenzy outside fading into a dull roar. "Quick," the tall man urged, his eyes scanning the street behind them. "We need to find a place to hide." "Will they chase us?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her face pale but determined. "Not if we stay smart," the man replied. "But we don't know how long that will last." Once they gathered their breath in a secluded corner, Scott looked at the boy again. Stay with us, buddy. You're not alone. You hear me? He needed to say it for himself as much as for the boy. The frail figure barely stirred, but Scott could see tiny flecks of color returning to his cheeks. Just then, a sound rumbled through the alley, a familiar voice mingled with distant sirens, yelling orders that echoed like warnings. A group of men swarmed the street as if hunting a prize, their shouts laced with authority and intimidation. Scott felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. "We need to move again," he said urgently. Without hesitation, they slipped deeper into the alley, a tight knot of fear and determination. Scott led them into the shadows of a small storage building, its entrance obscured by piles of discarded boxes. As they huddled together, the tall man looked at Scott, anxiety flickering in his eyes. "We need to get them away from here, draw their attention. Can you do that?" "Yeah," Scott said, trying to muster calm, feeling the weight of all their lives pinning down his resolve. "Just keep him safe." He felt Maria's hand tighten around his. "I'm not letting you go alone. You won't have to," he assured her. They were in this together. He stole a quick glance back at the boy, noticing the faintest pulse of consciousness reflected in his glassy eyes. They were grounding; those small glimpses of life kept him anchored. Scott peeked around the corner of the building, scanning the street. The men were getting closer, their silhouettes making Scott's heart race faster than any sprint ever could. He had to act. A plan ignited. He'd create a diversion. He'd risk it all for the boy, for everyone. "On three, I'll draw them away," he whispered to Maria and the others. "You all stay put. Keep him safe." Moments stretched in front of him like shadows. "Don't do anything stupid," Maria warned, her voice choked with emotion as she searched his eyes. "I won't. I promise." All he needed was a few moments, just long enough for them to slip away. Adrenaline coursing through him like fire, Scott took a deep breath and stepped into the open air. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice cracking but fierce. The men turned, a pack of wolves whose attention had been drawn by his boldness. Panic reverberated within him, but he dashed away, leading them down the street. He could hear the shouts, the rush of boots pounding behind him, each hurried breath filled with purpose, giving him strength. But as he glanced back, a new sight stole his focus. A flash of red in the chaos, the boy's blanket had snagged on one of the boxes left behind. Oh no! A fresh wave of terror gripped Scott. What if they found it? What if they knew? Behind him, Maria sprang forward, eyes wide and breathless. "Scott! What about the boy?" he shouted back, panic threading through his every word. "We can't leave him. We need to go back." With danger closing in behind him, the weight of the decision slammed into Scott's chest. Were they truly running for their lives, or were they only about to lose everything they had fought so hard to protect? Time hung heavy between his choices, and for a moment, his heart hesitated, caught between the chase and what they might lose. Would he save the boy, or would they all be lost in the shadows? As the threat loomed closer, Scott realized he had only one option left: to trust in the strength of the people around him, or risk it all for a single life still flickering with hope. Could they keep the boy safe, or was it too late? The answers waited just beyond their reach. Scott's heart raced as he watched the obscured alley swallow Maria's voice, her determination mingling with desperation. He turned, searching for an answer as his mind spiraled. Could he really go back? "Just a second," he said, barely registering the words as they slipped through his lips. Wasn't he ready to abandon that boy, not when every breath they shared felt like a fragile promise of survival. With a quick glance over his shoulder, Scott caught sight of the men still rampaging through the streets. They were relentless, hunting down anything that might escape their clutches. The fear swelled within him again, pushing him toward action. "Maria, wait!" he yelled, breaking into a sprint back toward the blanket. Adrenaline surged, giving him the energy to push past the fear creeping into his thoughts. Every stride was a plea to the universe, one more chance to make things right. "Scott, no!" Maria cried, following him instinctively, her voice echoing behind him. He reached the spot where the blanket had snagged. It was teetering on the edge of a toppled box, almost mocking him with its innocence. The world around him blurred into a haze of chaos, but he focused on that red fabric, a thread of hope he refused to sever. Breathless, Scott snatched the blanket, and as his fingers brushed against the fabric, he felt warmth radiate beneath. It echoed the boy's heartbeat, steady but faint. That pulse rekindled the urgency within him. "Let us go!" he shouted, spinning back toward Maria just as a pair of shadows crossed the alley's entrance. The men were flanking them, cutting off their escape. The realization struck hard, like ice dropping into boiling water. "Together!" Maria yelled, and they took off as one, sprinting back into the shadows of the storage building. The dark provided cover, but the fear of being found was like a living weight on their shoulders. Inside, the air was thick. The shadows seemed to watch them as they pressed into the farthest corner, the blanket cradled reverently between them. "What now?" the tall man whispered, glancing nervously toward the faint sounds drawing closer. "We hide," Scott said, voice low but steady. "And we think." He felt the boy's fragile form against the blanket, and for a second, they shared a connection that went beyond words. Scott knew he had to protect him, to keep them both safe. The boy represented everything: the uncertainty of their future, the possibility of hope. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside. The men had found something: a window, a door, evidence of life. Panic surged anew, his heartbeat a war drum in the back of his mind. "They're getting closer," Maria said, her voice trembling. "Just breathe," Scott reminded her, trying to infuse calm. He turned back to the boy, feeling the weight of responsibility wash over him. "We're not leaving you. You're safe with us." The boy stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering beneath bruised lids. Scott reached out, resting a gentle hand on his forehead, feeling heat radiate from the fevered skin. "Stay with us," he whispered, wanting desperately for him to feel their collective strength in that moment. A scuffle erupted outside, harsh voices calling to one another, breaking through the darkness. Scott's muscles tensed, each sound pushed him closer to the brink. Every moment felt heavy, laden with anticipation. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, their hiding spot trembled with the sound of footsteps echoing right outside. "Check back here, make sure no one slipped through," a man barked. The question reverberated like an alarm. Scott held his breath, instinctively pulling the blanket tighter around the boy. He needed a plan, something that could turn the tide before it was too late. In that moment, he realized the answer didn't just rely on him. Maria, the tall man, the others, they had to fight together, or they would all fall. But if they were going to make it out alive, the odds were stacked against them. How would they turn the table on fate itself in this moment of despair? With the walls closing in, memories of laughter, family dinners, and summer skies filled Scott's mind. He had to protect that raw beauty. "Get ready," he whispered to Maria, pulling her close to share the weight of their resolve. Would they rise to face the danger together, or would they become another story lost in the shadows? The answer lay just on the brink of unfolding. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in Scott's ears like a countdown. His heart raced, each beat a stark reminder of the danger they faced. He peered through the dim light, his eyes darting toward the narrow cracks of the walls, desperately searching for a way out. "Stay quiet," Scott urged, his voice just above a whisper. Maria nodded, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination as they instinctively leaned closer together, united by the silent understanding that their lives depended on it. The men prowled the edges of the building like wolves scouring for prey. Scott could see shadows flickering through the gaps, movements sharp and threatening. All he could think about was the boy. They had to keep him safe. That fragile, innocent heartbeat needed their protection. "Did you hear that?" one of the men called out, his voice rough and hard. Scott's stomach knotted at the sound, and a rush of adrenaline coursed through his veins. "Yeah, check there," another voice replied, and the weight of their approach sent icy tendrils of panic spiraling through the air. Scott shifted, glancing around for anything that could be used as a weapon or a distraction. They needed an escape plan, but the walls felt like a closing trap. Think, he muttered under his breath, his mind racing. He had to buy them time. "Maria," he whispered, "we need a noise. Something to lead them away." She caught his eye, already attuned to the urgency in his tone. "I can throw something, but what?" Before Scott could respond, she fumbled around the debris strewn at their feet. A rusted tin can caught her eye, and with a swift hand, she scrambled to grab it. On three, Scott gave her a nod, feeling the intensity of the moment. They had to act fast. 1, 2, 3. At the command, Maria hurled the can toward the opposite side of the alley, the sound reverberating through the dusty air like a siren. It crashed against an old barrel, the metallic clatter slicing through the tension. "Over there," one of the men shouted, bolting in the direction of the noise. Scott exchanged a quick look with Maria, a spark of hope igniting for a brief moment. "We move now," he urged, crouching low as he inched toward the back exit, hoping against hope that it was still clear. As they maneuvered silently, Scott felt the boy's shallow breathing beside him. He was the reason for all this madness, the reason they had put their lives on the line. Scott wrapped the blanket tightly around the child, cradling him like a fragile flower, trying to keep his spirit intact. With cautious strides, they approached a pair of half-open doors. Scott peered through the cracks, a rush of cool air brushing against his face. The outside world was still riddled with danger, but freedom beckoned. "We have to go now," Scott hissed. Maria nodded, her expression steady, but the fear of what lay beyond the door was palpable. As they slipped through, the night sky loomed above them, expansive yet cloaked in uncertainty. The city was alive with distant shouts and chaos, but in the shadows, there was a flicker of hope, a chance to escape. They sprinted into the darkness, each step heavier than the last, the echoes of the men growing faint, but never completely fading. The air felt electric as they darted from cover to cover, desperate for a safe place to pause and regroup. "Where do we go?" Maria panted, glancing around, panic creeping back into her voice. "Anywhere but here," Scott replied, his heart echoing the urgency of their fight. "We need to find a safe space. Maybe the old warehouse on Fifth?" But just as he spoke, a chilling thought struck him. But what if they follow? What if they know about the boy? That question hung in the air like a haunting specter. They had exchanged one prison for another. Would their plan work, or would fate conspire against them once more? As they furtively glanced down the deserted streets, the night seemed to hold its breath. Would they discover salvation in the unexpected corners of the city, or would they find themselves cornered once again? The answers felt elusive, like wisps of smoke. But one thing was certain: they were far from done, and their fight for survival was only just beginning. Scott and Maria rushed down the streets, shadows their only companions. The night was alive with the jagged echo of sirens and distant chaos. They darted through alleys, not daring to breathe too deeply as they transported the boy, still wrapped in the red blanket, between them. The thin fabric felt warm against Scott's chest, the weight of it a reminder of their fragile connection to hope. "Where to next?" Maria asked, her voice breathless but steady by resolve. "Let us keep moving toward the warehouse," Scott replied, eyes scanning their surroundings. He knew they needed a plan, one that accounted for the energy of danger lurking behind them, but also for the fragile lives hinging on their choices. As they sprinted further, a thought clawed at Scott's mind. The bullet he had dodged earlier was now ricocheting back toward him. What if they find us? What if they want to find us? Maria insisted, her voice cutting through his worry. There was strength in her certainty. Not if we keep moving. We can think of something. There is always something. But life in this city was unpredictable, a maze filled with treachery and endless possibilities. They burst into the dim light of a narrow street, seeking refuge among a cluster of old buildings. Scott's heart raced not just from exertion, but from the weight of the unknown ahead. Each footfall echoed like a freight train in his mind, questioning the legitimacy of their courage. Over there. Maria pointed toward an abandoned shop with a broken sign flickering faintly. It was their sanctuary, and they pressed inside, the smell of dust and memories enveloping them. Scott's pulse quickened. This place held secrets, layers of stories unspoken. It felt just enough like safety to draw breath. They huddled together, the boy still cradled in the blanket that felt more like a tether to reality than a piece of cloth. Scott laid a gentle hand against the boy's forehead, whispering soft words of assurance. "You're going to be okay." How true those words felt depended on the choices they made next. Maria knelt beside him, urgency tinging her voice. "We need to call someone. We can't just sit here waiting." "Right," Scott said, but doubt coiled around his gut. "But who can we trust?" "Anyone but them," Maria responded tersely, nodding towards the street outside where shadows danced like predators hunting their prey. "Then we move," Scott said, determination flooding his chest. "Let us find a way to alert the police, work together like we did back there. No more depending on luck." Maria's eyes lit up. "You're right. There are payphones further down the street. We can slip out, make the call, and get back before anyone sees us." They crept from shadow to shadow, one cautious step at a time. Maria's hand found Scott's, squeezing it tight. Together, she reaffirmed, a promise hanging in the air. They reached the payphone, and Scott's fingers trembled as he dialed, urgency thrumming through him. 911, he said when the operator answered, pouring out their story, the boy, the danger, his voice spilling like a river of anxiety. "Help is on the way," came the calm voice on the other end. Yet, as they waited for sirens to pierce the night, fear squeezed around their hearts. What if they come first? Scott wondered aloud, and Maria answered without hesitation, "We just have to hold the line." Silence coiled thickly around them, broken only by the soft breaths of hope. They pressed against each other. Every moment felt like an eternity, the boy's breathing slow and deliberate in Scott's arms, his fragile form a beacon of what lay ahead. And then it happened. A roar of sirens split through the silence, louder and louder, until they pulled into view. The police light sliced through the darkness, illuminating them in harsh brilliance. "Scott!" Maria exclaimed. But as the officers jumped from their cars, the shadows seemed to swirl again, growing thicker, the danger shifting just outside the light. Suddenly, the familiar faces from before emerged, angry figures barreling toward them, relentless prowlers closing in. Panic flared in Scott's chest. "No!" he shouted, feeling Maria tug on his arm toward the safety of the police. "Stay close," Maria urged, launching them toward the welcoming blue and red flashing lights. The urgency of hope burst within them as officers intervened, stepping between them and the looming threats. "Get away from them!" An officer barked, intercepting a figure before it could reach the boy. Scott felt his breath come rushing back in, relief flooding his veins. This was a lifeline, a tangible chance to change everything. "He needs help," he shouted, urgency clawing his voice, gesturing to the boy. The officers took charge, tending to the boy swiftly as the danger melted away, reeling back from the siren's power. Freedom pulled at Scott's heart, a sweet and intoxicating taste after the darkness. They had escaped. No, they had chosen to fight for something bigger than themselves. "Scott," Maria touched his arm gently, her face a tapestry of emotions. We did it. We fought together. As they watched the boy get loaded into an ambulance, Scott felt a shift inside him, an awakening to what was truly important. He looked at Maria, the fierce warrior beside him, and knew they had built bridges today, connecting shattered lives with resilience. But this was only the beginning. There were more struggles awaiting them, more lives that needed saving, more transformations that could shake the foundations of a city. So many stories untold. With renewed determination, the fire of purpose ignited inside Scott's heart. "This is just the start," he whispered to Maria, a glimmer of hope dancing in his eyes. "Yeah, we're not done yet," she replied, smiling brightly for the first time, breaking through the night's heavy shroud. Together, they would bring light into the cracks, ignite the spark they found in the darkness, and rally the community until no one remained invisible, ready to change the world together. And just like that, they took the first step forward. This is the moment of transformation. You need to subscribe now to not miss the next exclusive stories that will inspire the world. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and show you care about these real stories of human connection. Comment below your reactions and feelings about this incredible ending. And please, share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformation. Don't wait not even one more second to share it with those you love.